name is Tom Levere. I'm the president of the Weeks Forest Products based in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm also a NALA board of director. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Molly Razor. I first met Molly about 3 years ago in San Antonio, Texas, after I asked Andre Smith at Weyerhaeuser if I could borrow her to speak on the trading show floor in what we call the Learning Lounge, and it was a huge hit. So we decided to ask Molly to come back and give us an update on the status of the forest around Mount St. Helens and record it so that we can capture it and share this good message with everybody in our industry. It's a fantastic message of rejuvenation, renewal, and sustainability. And after you hear the Weyerhaeuser Mount St. Helens story, it'll make you really proud to be working in our industry. So just a little bit on Molly. She is the harvest planner for Weyerhaeuser's St. Helens Tree Farm based out of Castle Rock, Washington. She works with an interdisciplinary team of inventory analysts, foresters, engineers, harvest managers, log marketing specialists, and transportation managers. That's a mouthful. As a team, they're responsible for sustaining the near-term, mid-term, and long-term harvest on approximately 384,000 acres on the tree farm there around Mount St. Helens. Molly's been with Weyerhaeuser since 2000 and has the proud honor of having been affiliated with the St. Helens Tree Farm for the entirety of her career. Having started Weyerhaeuser 20 years after the disaster and recovery at Mount St. Helens, Molly will be the first to tell you how privileged she feels to be presenting this topic today, something so important to our industry story. And with that, Molly, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Tom. You guys all hear me? Got me? All right. Good news. So yeah, I'm not great with technology, so just want to make sure you guys all can hear me. As Tom said, I'm super proud to be presenting this story to you guys today. When I was asked to do it in 2019, I right away, I'll be the first to tell you, in 1980, I was 2 years old. I, in so many ways, feel that I am not the person to be telling this story. I lived in Illinois. I was in diapers. I had no idea what was happening in Southwest Washington at that point in time. But I do have the great honor of having spent the first 10 to 15 years of my career with Weyerhaeuser, working with the people that are the experts, the guys who lived it, the guys who were a part of the before, the during, and the many years following this truly phenomenal event. I know just a few of their stories, but I know that in the time that I've got to give you guys today, there's absolutely no way that what I'm going to tell you can even begin to convey what they lived, what they did, what they saw, and really what they gave us. It was a vision that they had. They managed to turn something that was really a very horrifying, horrible experience into something that now, 42 years later, like Tom said, we can all be pretty wowed and pretty proud to be a part of what happened there. So Mount St. Helens, it changed everything. It changed the way that we think about volcanic eruptions. It changed our appreciation for the resilience of nature. It brought to our attention the rate at which nature recovers on its own, but it also allowed us to see the real benefits of active forest management in the shadow of a completely devastating natural disaster. It changed Weyerhaeuser's business plan. It forced us to adapt, to make this work. And most importantly, it changed the lives and the livelihoods of so many people affected by it. 57 people lost their lives that day and in the days following the disaster. 57 people died, and there is unfortunately no changing that. This tragic event claimed 57 lives, and is something that as we go through this today, it's always kind of hanging over hanging over the topic. This was a really, really horrible event that we've got an awesome recovery story out of it, but we really do have to remember that this was devastating. People's lives changed forever, and it's again, it's a memorial in so many ways of that, probably more than anything. So working through the history, for those of you that aren't familiar, May 18th, 1980, 8:32 a.m. It was a Sunday, and that's something that we also maybe take for granted a little bit. The fact that it occurred on a Sunday. There was a shutdown zone, or a red zone they called it, 5 miles around the summit of the mountain. That red zone, really, the public was not allowed within that. A few media members were within there. The geologists, the volcanologists were allowed within that area. But that 5 mile, within that 5 mile red zone, no operations were allowed to be occurring. And we need to remember that the extent of damage caused by this eruption was far beyond anything we expected. That 5 mile shutdown was nothing compared to the damage that actually followed. The volcanologists, like I say, it changed the way we think about things. We had never seen a lateral blast, a pyroclastic flow like this in the past. The last eruption had occurred in 1857, and it was very few people witnessed it. But even then, it was nothing like this. A lateral blast up to 100 miles per hour, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, blasted out of the side of that mountain. The mountain that had been set 9,600 feet tall prior to those few minutes was new summit at 8,365 feet. And it left a crater 220 feet below that new 8,300 foot summit. Again, something that we couldn't even imagine, something we couldn't plan for it. And the degrees of damage, like I say, there was that 5 mile red zone. The damage from heat kill alone extended 18 miles from the summit of that mountain. And like I say, the fact that this occurred on a Sunday, in so many ways is a bit of a blessing. I hate saying that, but it really was. So many of the guys that I called colleagues earlier in my career, if this had occurred on a Friday, if it had occurred on a Monday, I think we all realized the toll that it would have taken on our personnel, the toll it would have taken on Weyerhaeuser's resources, on our ability to salvage, log, and recover. We really don't know how awful it could have been. And again, because of that, the notion that it occurred on a Sunday in so many ways was a bit of a blessing. So kind of giving you the lay of the land, so you understand where Mount St. Helens falls relative to where we are at Weyerhaeuser. So Mount St. Helens, get my little laser pointer here. Mount St. Helens is this guy right here. If we zoom into that, you can kind of see on your slide there that these contour lines, the whole north side of the mountain blew out. It blew out into Spirit Lake, and for those of you who've been there, you've seen it. You've seen now, 42 years later, there is still a log jam of logs in Spirit Lake from that eruption. So when it blew, it washed down the side of the mountain. Like we say, it took the top of the mountain off with it. Largest mudslide in recorded history. Slid into Spirit Lake, up and over the ridge, up into St. Helens Lake, up to Coldwater Peak, and then it washed back down. And so all those logs that you see today in Spirit Lake were standing timber at the time of the eruption that washed up the hill and washed back down into the lake. And zooming out here, looking at the extent of damage, 150,000 acres were impacted by this eruption. A majority of the ownership of the timberland ownership was held by Weyerhaeuser at the time, by Washington State Department of Natural Resources state lands, and certainly by the U.S. Forest Service on the Gifford-Pinchot. Probably the largest landowners impacted. However, there were other industrial private landowners impacted, and certainly when we talk about the further devastation beyond just the immediate blast damage, when we talk about the mud flow, then we start impacting homes and communities and watersheds. But as I said, the north face of the mountain blew out. The mud flow that you so often see pictures of and media coverage of, the mud flow that we see on the news is generally the mud flow that extended down the North Fork of the Toutle River, to the Toutle River, to the Cowlitz River, settled out down the Cowlitz River and into the Columbia River. But there was also mud flow on the South Fork of the Toutle River, which we don't often hear about as much. And as a result of that, a lot of our actually, one of our campsites was impacted. Our 12 Road camp was impacted pretty significantly. But again, just looking at the extent of that blast zone in that general area, 150,000 acres, 68,000 acres of which at that point in time Weyerhaeuser owned. So just completely devastating, not only to the timber landholders in the area, but as I mentioned, to the community. This is a very, 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 very healthy wood basket, and was a healthy wood basket. Many mill destinations. The Port of Longview sits right here. And so with the notion of the impact that this disaster might have on the industry, it was felt pretty quickly. And the aftermath of it, we certainly endured for many years following the eruption. The economy, I don't know that it was necessarily related to the eruption, but the economy was drastically changed over that course of time. And coincident with a natural disaster like this, it was a real tough time for this Southwest Washington timber community, if you will. And then just for kind of zoom out a little bit more, I didn't indicate Portland, Oregon sits right down here. Vancouver, Washington sits right here. Woodland, Washington, the Lewis River, Kelso, Longview, and then my office up here in Castle Rock. Okay, so looking at the extent of damage to Weyerhaeuser, like I said, 68,000 acres at the time of the eruption were owned, of the impacted acres were owned by Weyerhaeuser. And at that point in time, that was about 14% of the St. Helens tree farm, a pretty big hit to the St. Helens farm. And again, 150,000 acres total between state, private, and then the federal lands. In total, it's estimated about 4.7 billion board feet of timber were leveled. And just kind of looking at some of these slides, I don't know if you guys get a chance, get a good view of that. But I don't know if you can see the fell of this timber is laying in the direction of the blast. It was absolutely phenomenal. Within seconds, this landscape of forest ecosystem was just instantly leveled. And like I said, there were degrees of damage everywhere from buried in mud to buried in water to buried in ash to blown over to standing dead heat kill. The extent of the damage ranged with sometimes rhyme, sometimes reason, and sometimes just what happened here. Looking at this guy here and the ash just covering the landscape, and that ash to this day, y'all, to this day, that ash in many places is still out there. It's really, really, truly remarkable. And as we said, 68,000 acres of the blast damage area were owned by Weyerhaeuser at the time. About 650 miles of roads we determined to be significantly damaged and in need of significant repair. Like I say, ash just covering the landscape, in some places up to 6 feet deep. 19 bridges were damaged and destroyed. $66 million casualty loss. It took a good amount of time to determine that because part of the casualty loss was in the timber. And the timber, as you might guess, in those mud flows, didn't necessarily all stay on the landscape. So there was quite a bit of trying to determine, is this timber that ended up in the Cowlitz River, does this belong to Weyerhaeuser? Does this belong to the Forest Service? Does this belong to the state? So there was a good number of years that it took the company and the agencies involved to land on that casualty loss. As I indicated earlier, two logging camps were severely impacted. Our 12 Road camp, this is a photo of the shops at 12 Road on the South Fork of the Toutle. 12 Road camp was severely impacted. Our 19-mile camp on the North Fork of the Toutle was severely impacted as well. And one of our logging camps, Camp Baker, which sat right probably 6 miles from the summit of the mountain, would have been 8 miles from the summit of the mountain. It was completely inundated and destroyed in the mud flow within I think several weeks of the eruption. It was completely destroyed and irreparable. So what do you do? Where do you start? And I wasn't there, and I can't even imagine the mindset of the folks who are having to make these decisions, where to start. At Weyerhaeuser then and Weyerhaeuser now, we don't start if we don't talk about safety first. We don't do anything if we can't do it safely. And so that was the decision. Can we do this safely? If we can, we got to try. We got to try to do this. And so we tried, and we succeeded. We encountered a lot of places that things couldn't be done safely. And in those cases, we had to walk away. It just simply couldn't be safely salvaged logged. Again, looking at some of these numbers in here, it wasn't just 68,000 acres of merchantable timber blown over, done, gone. Got to try and salvage it. It was varying age classes. It was a managed forest at that point in time, where you certainly had merchantable timber, but you had everything from 1-year-old seedlings on up to merchantable timber. And so in so many ways, it was a complete loss. There was no merchantability in trees younger than age probably about 25. And so we just simply had to walk away from those trees. We couldn't salvage them because there was no value in salvaging them. No product could be rendered. But on about 20,700 acres of the property, we were able to salvage the timber. And over the course of about 2 years, we managed to salvage about 850 million board feet. It took up to an estimated 1,000 loggers to make that happen. 75 logging sites running. And at the peak of that salvage effort, 600 loads a day coming off the property. Today we're running, at our good peak, we're running about 200 loads a day, and that is a lot for this property. The notion of 600 loads coming off of this, relatively small footprint, 68,000 acres is a lot, but that's a lot of log truck traffic. That's a lot of exposure to a lot of things that could have ended up not working out nearly as well and as effectively as it did. And again, kind of taking a look at some of these pictures, this I've always found this one to be really interesting. What's going on here? I talked about the ash, and the ash really was immediately impactful, in many ways deadly. To those that were trapped in that eruption event. But even in the aftermath of it, it was wreaking havoc on our equipment. You can see in this photo that the bark has been stripped off the base of this tree. That's not bear damage. That's not beaver damage. That's actually removing the bark prior to cutting the tree, because the ash that had been blasted and blown into this tree bark was dulling the chains so significantly that the cutters were having to change chains far more frequently than is even close to efficient. And again, more of the ash here, just kind of looking at this photo. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but this cutter, getting out of the way, making that final cut. You can see the ash just shedding off of that tree, raining down on him. If you can see there, but he's wearing a full respirator, and all all of the operators up there were absolutely, again, just in a very, very, very fragile situation where safety was just at the front of everyone's mind every single moment of working up there. And again, you can, as we talked about it before, just the mess. I found a quote from President Carter a couple of days ago when I was digging through some old history here, and President Carter said, I haven't been there and I haven't seen it, but I'm the pictures that I've seen, I'm told that it's a moonscape. He said, but from these pictures that I've seen, the moon looks like a golf course compared to what's going on up there. The timber just laying every single direction that you don't want it to be, and you have to work in it. Just a phenomenal event. So started salvage logging pretty quickly after the eruption, and actually even within 1 month of the eruption, we were already trying to figure out how to salvage log and how to reforest again. Can we do this? And as I understand it, there were a lot of doubts. Many didn't know if we'd ever get trees to grow again in our lifetimes. But again, Weyerhaeuser said same thing. Can we do it safely? If we can do it, we have to try, because this land is our future. We have to try. And so, like I say, by June of 1980, they were already trying. And with a few trials and a few errors, they learned pretty quickly that they had to get the roots down into the soil. And so in this particular photo here, I don't know if you can see all that gray, but that is ash. And in this case, about 5 inches of ash. So they had to dig down to that ash. Then they had to dig the typical 8-10 inches to get the bare roots into the mineral soil. So as you can imagine, an already very strenuous task of hand planting trees made even more difficult by the conditions of the ash, and certainly by the condition in many cases of standing dead seedlings, standing dead saplings, standing dead reprod 20, 30 feet tall. Just the situation relative to safety, the situation relative to productivity was something very, very different than we had ever encountered before. But like I said, with some trial and some learning opportunities determined, we were able to do it. We would not have been able to do it with a heck of a lot of people, a heck of a lot of labor, a heck of a lot of hard workers, up to 400 planters per day starting in 1981. And over the course of the about 7-year period, really a bulk and majority of the reforestation was done in 5 years. But by 1987 planting season, we were fully complete with that reforestation effort. 250 seedlings per day, again at the peak. Absolutely crazy. So over the course of that period of time, those 7 planting seasons that were invested in that footprint up at Mount St. Helens, 18.4 million Douglas fir and noble fir seedlings were hand planted over those 45,500 acres that were reforested. So looking at the blast zone regeneration, I don't know how many of you on the phone are familiar with reforestation. But it's a lot more than just grabbing a tree, putting it in the ground and getting it growing. There's actually quite a bit of planning that goes into acquiring seedlings, growing seedlings, rearing seedlings, and then transporting seedlings to get them in the ground. And since, again, we plant seedlings, it takes a year's worth of planning to go into that reforestation effort. And you have to assure not only that you have enough trees, but you have the right trees to go into the right piece of ground. Not every single seedling will work in every single piece of ground. And it typically, in our normal operations, it takes anywhere from 1 to 3 years in nursery time to grow those seedlings that we outplant. And because of this, we couldn't plan for that. We couldn't plan for an immediate 45,500 acre clear cut. We didn't have seedlings in the queue waiting to go into the ground. And even then, we can only plant 4 to 5, maybe 6 months out of the year if we're lucky. This was going to be an endeavor. it took us 7 years, like I said, and a lot of that had to do with again, the availability of seedlings, just the pure nature of reforestation in the West. But it took us a good amount of time. And as you kind of look through this period of time, I should say, if you look at the colors on the map, you can really, you can see that we started slow. In 1981, we started slow with about, 3,900 acres. By the next year, by 1982, we started stepping it up. Like I said, it takes 1 to 2 years in the nursery, 1 to 3 years in the nursery. By the time we get to 1983, you see we're in full stride. 1983 was the big year, planting about 11,000 acres that year. Now we kind of start ramping down, 3,700 acres in 1985, and by 86 and 87, it was really just cleaning up, getting some survival issues taken care of and interplanted. And like I say, again, by 1987, we were fully through the reforestation efforts in the blast zone. And one of the things that I've added to this slide since our 2019 plantation, our 2019 presentation in San Antonio, are these hatched areas here, and these brown hatched areas. These are areas that we have reforested in the blast zone, because we're actively harvesting in the Mount St. Helens blast zone right now. We have been harvesting in there really in production mode since about 2021, and really we're gonna be there for the next 15 to 20 years, working our way through the harvest of this very unique landscape. And so we talked a little bit about reforestation. We talked a little bit certainly talked about salvage logging, but there's this huge part of the rotation that we really don't talk about a whole lot in our industry. But that was certainly a big part of the recovery efforts at Mount St. Helens, and that's just general silviculture. Silviculture, the science of growing trees. So with that, we very similarly to the log salvage effort, very similarly to the reforestation effort, we know how to do this stuff. How do we tweak it? How do we modify it? How do we make it work in this Mount St. Helens eruption zone? And so really with the silviculture, it was almost business as usual. It wasn't, because again, you're dealing with this massive amount of acreage that is in need of treatment. You're dealing with seasonality and timing, where you can only do so much within a certain season. But we really, relative to silviculture, at this point in time, by crown closure, PCT age 12-ish, we were really able to pick up almost, standard site-specific Weyerhaeuser silviculture as we knew it at the time, and really implement those practices on the blast zone landscape. We started commercially thinning up there in 2005. We finished in 2012. So we commercially thinned about 7,900 acres of ground in the blast zone. And like I said, the site specific is really how we're executing all of our silviculture. So in some spots we opted to fertilize in responsive sites. In other sites we opted to not. And those additional applications of fertilizer happened over the course of the last probably 20 years we've been fertilizing up there. Harvesting in the blast zone, like I said, over the next 15 to 20 years, we're going to be up there. And you think about that. It took us 7 years to plant it. Why is it going to take us 20 years to harvest it? Well, a lot has changed since 1980 relative to forest practice regulations. Forest practice regulations, certainly relative to logging equipment. So we're not just moving back into this area and harvesting the stands that we planted. We're having to retool things a little bit to accommodate those Washington forest practice regulations, to accommodate our sustainable forestry initiative objectives, to accommodate the logging equipment we have available to us, and once more to accommodate our markets, our customers, what our customers' needs are. We can't just come into this area and clear cut 35,000 acres at once. That's not something that makes even a remote sense to do whatsoever. And like I say, operating under Washington forest practice regulations, we're actually We're actually confined to minimizing our harvest size through harvest timing and harvest sequencing. We're only allowed to have 240 acres of contiguous clear-cut opening at one point in time. Contiguous 240 acres. What does that mean? What is contiguous clear-cut acres? That's an area is deemed clear-cut if it is less than 4 feet in height or less than 5 years in age. So there's a real big sequencing puzzle that has to happen on the 35,000 acres in the Mount St. Helens Blast Zone, where we have 35,000 acres. We have to somehow sequence things out so that at no point in time we have areas that are greater than 250 acres, 240 acres, I'm sorry. So an example of this, it's kind of tough to get your head around, but if you have say you have a 4-year-old plantation that's 50 acres, and right next to it, sharing perimeter with it, you've got another 3-year-old plantation that's 50 acres. So you got 100 acres so far. Then you add another 2-year-old plantation that's 50 acres, and a 1-year-old plantation next to it that's 50 acres. And now I want to harvest this unit right next door to it. I got 250 acres that are less than 5 years old or less than 4 feet in height. I can't do it. I can't harvest that last 50 acres. So you might imagine that working across this landscape of predominantly single age class timber in the Mount St. Helens Blast Zone, it's a harvesting puzzle, a sequencing puzzle that you better believe the harvest planner on the St. Helens Tree Farm is spending an awful lot of time getting that harvest sequencing figured out for, like I say, the next 20 years. I am manually sequencing my way through these blocks to assure that at no point in time we'll be in violation of any of those forest practice regulations or sustainable forestry initiative objectives. So, you know, when you think about all of the pieces of this recovery effort, the salvage logging, the reforestation, and then the silviculture and the management, the measurements that were occurring over the course of really these last 42 years. You know, it really, in so many ways, I think of it as a bit of a microcosm of what we do. Is it business as usual? Not really, but it really kind of is. It's following pretty closely to the way that we knew how to work then. We adapted, we harvested, we planted, we managed till final harvest. We started over. And like I say, with what we're doing up there right now, that cycle has already begun over. It's begun over again. And as we're kind of approaching this final phase of silviculture, if you will, final harvest is the final step of silviculture. As we're approaching that step, it's that final phase. It's pretty remarkable to me to think about starting over again, to think about, you know, the next generation of trees, which we've already started up there on a piece of ground where we didn't know if we'd be able to get trees to grow again. It's a pretty cool legacy, and it means a lot to me. Anybody who talks to me on the St. Helens topic, on the St. Helens Tree Farm topic, this place means an awful lot to me. The legacy of it, it means so much to me because it meant so much to the guys before me, and it meant so much to the guys before them. It means a lot to our company's history, and really anyone who's ever had a hand in managing a piece of this footprint. It means a lot. And like I say, as we kind of work our way through the final phase of silviculture in this blast zone, I think we all want to be sure that we're doing justice to this legacy, to this really cool story. And in so many ways, you know, I see this kind of photo that you've got up here on the screen is my little grasp at legacy. Like I said, in 1980, I was as a baby. I wasn't here, and I didn't get a chance to see, like I say, what the guys before me got to see and got to live and got to experience. But a colleague of mine very early on decided to start capturing a photo series of various points across the blast zone to capture the salvage, to capture the recovery, to capture the change. And I think of this photo series of his as a bit of a legacy. So this photo here is on the 2520 road Post-eruption, pre-salvage, this is 1980. And you can see here, this timber just split, just tipped over, not tipped over, but it just broke off. Wind damage, heat kill. You can see you've got standing dead in here. This stand was about 25 to 30 years old, as I understand it, at the time of the eruption. And this is a good distance away from the mountain. So to see this devastation where trees just kind of snapping off, I really can't to this day get my head around what occurred out there. So this is 1980, post-eruption, pre-salvage. And we fast forward to 1981. Salvage is complete, hasn't been planted yet. This unit wasn't planted until 1983. And so you can see here, you no longer have the standing dead. You no longer, most of the logging debris has been, I should say that the blast kind of slash has been removed from the ground. Hasn't been planted yet. Like I said, this unit was planted in 1983. So then we fast forward. Oh no, that's not where we wanted to go. We fast forward to this photo here, 2002. This is 20 years after planting, actually 20 growing seasons. And you can see, when we go back to what it looked like post-salvage to 20 years later, not something that you maybe would have expected to see. You've got trees in this particular case, probably 30 feet tall, just remarkable. And then we fast forward to 2009. This is what, 10, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. This is 9 years after my hire date. So when I first came into the blast zone, this is what things look like to me. So this is how I first knew it. So where I say the photo series that was captured by this individual means so much to me, to be able to go back to what it looked like and be able to see what it is right now. So back in 2019, when I was asked to present this to NALA, I said, shoot, we kind of dropped the ball on this photo series. Nobody, since this individual retired, nobody has kept up on this. Darn it, I'm dropping the ball on my upholding the legacy here. So I got to get out there and get some photos. So before that presentation, I ran out and I found that this 2520 spot, which actually was a little tough to find because the road has been reworked in there. And but anyway, found this spot, captured a photo, and this is what it looked like. and I remember, being a little bit, darn it, this is not what I was hoping to show. I have all of this great documentation from the past, and then this is what I've got to show. So when I got back into cell coverage that day, I actually texted this photo to the original photographer, and I said, "Listen, man, I'm sorry, this is all I could come up with." And long story short, he was elated. When you think about it, this is nothing but a sea of woods right now, nothing but trees on a spot that we weren't sure we'd ever get trees to go again. We have an amazing landscape of maturing forests in an area where we didn't know we ever would. It's a testament to trying hard. It's a testament to working with nature. And it's really a testament to so much of what so many of folks in this industry of who we are. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA. And our company founder, Frederick Weyerhaeuser, in the early part of our company's inception, made a comment that has really stuck with us. What we do here isn't for us, and nor is it for our children, but it's for our grandchildren. Sustainability is what we do, and it's something that we often don't even realize, but we've been doing this for a very long time. It's just part of doing business. I tell people we've been doing sustainability before sustainability was a thing. In 1925, we advocated for legislation to incent reforestation. In 1937, we began researching sustainable yield forestry. And in 1938, we began hand planting seedlings. And to this day, in our Western operations, we are still hand planting seedlings. In 1941, the Clemens Tree Farm was established, becoming the first certified tree farm in the United States. And as we discussed, in 1987, we completed the 7-year reforestation effort of the 45,500 acres of the Mount St. Helens eruption blast zone. We've been doing things like this for a very long time, and I think so many of us in the industry, we don't even really realize it. We don't stop and talk about the recovery efforts of the Yakult burns in the 1930s and 1940s. We rarely talk about the Columbus Day storm in 1962 and the reforestation and the salvage efforts that followed that. We don't talk about the windstorms. We don't talk about the ice storms. We don't talk about Hurricane Katrina, the hurricanes every year, the tornadoes every year. We don't talk about it. We just do it. It's what we do as everyday business. And the way that I see it, it just makes sense. It's the way that we sustain our business is to just do what's right for the land, what's right for the forest, what's right for our communities, what's right for where we live. And one thing I noticed as I was sort of resurrecting this presentation from 2019. And this is, to me, I think a really, really key point of, like I say, who we are. It's just what we do. We adapt and we make what we do work with what we're given. And I had no idea, as I was talking about the Yakult burns and the Columbus Day storm and all of the events that our industry has endured over hundreds of years, or 100+ years now. I had no idea at that point in time that just 10 months around the calendar, we would be dealing with a very devastating landscape changing fire in Oregon. And as I say here, in 2021, we planted 116,980,000 seedlings company-wide, and 7.1 million of those were dedicated to the 2020 Labor Day fire reforestation effort. 2021 was the first year of reforesting. It was the first of what will be many years. Again, the scale of recovery on that Oregon fire damaged ground is unbelievable. But likewise to Mount St. Helens, and likewise to the many events that we've recovered from in the past. The teams in Oregon are working their way through it, working through it safely, working through it with a determination to do what's right to sustain our industry. And it's really yet another truly remarkable story. So like I say, this is everyday business for us. Sustainability is what we do. And regardless of where you start in this rotation, you talk about farming, you got a rotation. It really, truly is a rotation because it just keeps going. Whether you start at the tree improvement side in the nurseries, or you start at the log destination side in the mills, this thing just keeps moving. And it doesn't just move on its own. It takes an awful lot of people and an awful lot of resources and an awful lot of time to make it happen. But just kind of stepping through, like I say, the nurseries, tree improvements, early rotation is certainly where we're planting trees, preparing the ground to plant first, planting trees, dealing with competing vegetation. This is, probably 5, 6, 7 years into the rotation in the West. We get into mid-rotation, thinning, commercial thinning, fertilization, pruning in some of our southern operations. That throughout this whole mid-rotation and early rotation and even late rotation, all of that is happening underneath and in accord with sustainable forest initiative objectives, state forest practice regulations, federal forest practice regulations, all under constant monitoring, constant measuring, constant modeling, and constant validating. All of these pieces fit together until we get to the engineering, harvesting, transportation phase of things. I shouldn't say until, because at that point in time is probably where we're extraordinarily focused on sustainability and forest practice regulations at that point. But I call out engineering, harvesting, and transportation because that's actually more than just a point in time. That's about a 5-year period for us in our Western operations, because it takes so much time to get our units ready to go. to keep them in accord with our SFI objectives, to keep them in accord with forest practice regulations, to iron out the details that allow us to continue to operate in a sustainable and in an environmentally sound fashion under the guidance of our Washington State forest practices and Oregon State forest practices and many different forest practice regulations. And certainly the marketing component is probably more folks on this call are maybe more in tune with that marketing side of things than I am. But that's of course that's where it all happens. When we're able to take these 40 to 50 years worth of work and turn them into product, turn them into revenue, turn them into something our society very much needs and something our society very much wants, it allows us to perpetuate this. It allows us to invest again and continue this cycle into the future. So just real quick brief on Weyerhaeuser, who we are, where we are. We've got about 11 million acres of ownership in the US. In Canada, I don't have that on this slide, but in Canada, we have about 14 million acres that we cooperatively manage with the Crown, I believe. We're managing those 14 million acres sort of in accord with others. And where we look at kind of the footprint here in the United States, we've got our Western Timberlands holdings, which is where I am, 2.5 million acres in the West. High value Douglas fir is our predominant product there, although we're also pretty lucky. We've got a significant whitewood component to our portfolio and also a little bit of hardwood. I always tell folks I feel really lucky to be working on a footprint where the trees that we're growing, the trees that we're harvesting, the trees that we're planting are native to this site. Douglas fir, noble fir, western hemlock, in particular, where I work here in the Lower Columbia region. Really pretty fortunate to be able to take, like I say, that tree that's native to the site and still quite valuable product at the same time. Northern hardwoods, we have 1.2 million acres in our northern hardwoods holdings, 50 hardwood and softwood species there. And then in our southern timberlands holdings, about 6.8 million acres there. And again, you can see spread pretty well across those southern states in southern yellow pine, loblolly pine. So getting close to wrapping up here with you guys, as I mentioned to you, the meaningfulness of the legacy of this Mount St. Helens footprint, this St. Helens tree farm, what it means to me and why I care so much about it. It's really just, like I say, doing right by the folks that were here to manage the ground before us and doing what's right now so that the people after us really can continue that good work into the future. And this to me is a really great example of really that work coming together. This is that same seedling you maybe remember earlier in the slideshow, planted in 1983, 7 inches tall, in 5 inches of ash. And here in that same stand now in 2022, a tree, 116 feet tall. The ultimate report card for a forester as a well done. Pretty cool. So this is a zoom out of that stand where that tree lives. And this in 2024, this stand will be harvested. It was planted so that it could be harvested with the intent of turning it over, planting it again, managing it again. But it was planted with the intent of being harvested. And the notion of that legacy that I talk about, it doesn't stop there, and it doesn't just keep cycling back in through planting, reforesting, and managing. There's actually a little offshoot in there where you guys at NOLA and the work that you do, where you kind of fit in there. These trees and the legacy of the reforestation that occurred at Mount St. Helens, they're going to get turned into logs, and those logs are going to get turned into lumber, and that lumber is going to get turned into homes and into communities, into shelter for our entire world. And to me, because of that, the legacy of Mount St. Helens and the recovery at Mount St. Helens, it'll be with us forever. It's a really neat, really cool, remarkable story that I'm so happy to share with you guys, and really, like I say, feel quite privileged to have gotten the honor to do that with you all today. So at this point in time, I think we can open it up to questions. I've left here at the end a handful of follow-up links that they're a mouthful, but yeah, at this point in time, let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah, so now everyone, now is the time to drop the questions in the Q&A if you have any. I see one in the Q&A from Tom. I'm not sure if you covered this, but today we hear a lot about fire danger out west due to extreme drought conditions. How is Weyerhaeuser managing through this challenge?
Yeah, that's something that is undoubtedly it's looming over all of us. You never know what you're going to get, and so with that, it's really trying to be as proactive as we possibly can, trying to have all of the planning efforts in place, all of the shutdown efforts in place, all of our operators equipped should something happen. With what occurred in 2020, I don't think any of us could have imagined what occurred there, and it's certainly something that we never want to experience again. Those of us involved in the industry, we understand that fire is a part of being on the landscape, and it's a risk that is like I say, always looming. It's a part of like I say, the landscape on which we work. It's inherent that it could very well happen. So everything that we can do to minimize everything that we can do to minimize the ignition, because once you get ignition, you never know what's going to happen. It's tempering our operations and getting our operators, keeping our operators as safe as possible. It's a tough one though, because it's definitely a risky endeavor.
I see a couple of more questions that are in the Q&A. The first one is, do you have examples of areas that were not reforested? How did they compare 40 years later?
Oh yeah, no, that's a really great question. I actually have a slide in here that I kind of had to blow through. Yeah, so examples of what was reforested and what wasn't reforested. This to me it's when I first moved out here as a 22-year-old right out of college, I was blown away by this it was almost a controlled experiment. Right adjacent to Weyerhaeuser's ground is the U.S. Forest Service, now National Volcanic Monument. And the Forest Service, I commend them, because I'm not a patient person, and Weyerhaeuser didn't have the capacity to wait. Weyerhaeuser had to plant, because it's our business to produce products and to keep this land growing timber. But the Forest Service said, hey, we have the opportunity to step back a second and watch and see how nature recovers on its own. And really, I encourage all of you who get the opportunity to visit Mount St. Helens, if you haven't, to visit the west side of the mountain up Spirit Lake Highway. At the very end of the road is the Johnson Ridge Observatory, and you can set foot within the volcanic monument where no trees were planted. So this line right here on this slide, we used to call it the green line, because this was the volcanic monument over here, and this was Weyerhaeuser, is still Weyerhaeuser land that was planted. And this was probably maybe 15 years after the eruption that this photo was taken. So you can see over here, you still have kind of standing dead, reprod age timber, if you will, trees But you can definitely tell a difference. And like I say, I think it's the coolest thing ever. As a college kid, when they talk about this stuff, they talk about Clementian successional theory, where a site is completely starts over, it's denuded. An event occurs, whether it's a fire or whether it's a volcanic eruption, and then over the course of time, nature takes its time and it reestablishes. And we've seen this in the volcanic monument. We've seen nature do its thing with no assistance from man. Whereas on the Weyerhaeuser footprint, we see a pretty significantly expedited recovery, where nature was given a little nudge by man with that hand planting. But yeah, over here in the monument, to me, it is seriously one of the, if you're a science geek like I kind of am, it is seriously one of the neatest comparisons you will ever see. Nature recovering at its rate, and the Weyerhaeuser ground recovering with a little helping hand from mankind is pretty spectacular comparison. Thanks for asking that. Good question.
We have another one asking, are there any specific lessons of pivoting pulled from the Mount St. Helens that was used during the pandemic?
Oh gosh, it's really kind of funny, because when I think about in the early part of this conversation, I talked about the guys that were here before me, and so often I find myself saying, my gosh, what would they have done? What did they do when they ran into this? And so many of them now, actually almost all of them, are retired. All of them from the time of the eruption have retired. So the lessons learned, I think certainly the wherewithal, and certainly the adapting and pivoting and figuring out how to make it work safely. I think that is certainly psyche that has been very present in our last 2 years worth of work, and probably most specifically in Oregon, with what they endured, pandemic atop of trying to recover from a massive wildfire. I think more than anything, probably the psyche and the psychology of trying to stay positive and trying to, number one, try to stay safe. I think that's not a parallel I had really thought about, but I think there's certainly truth to it. Yeah.
All right. And then last question with our minutes we have left here. What is the difference between the managed timberlands in the area and those public lands that were left for nature to restore? Can we use this as an example of how managed forest improve the overall forest?
Yeah, I think that's certainly, it's a really subjective, you can answer that question a lot of ways, depending upon your objective. And I think, like I say, to me as a scientist, it is so totally cool to see how nature recovers on its own. It's something that we all need to appreciate, and something that I think is really, really very valuable, especially in our fast-paced world of today. And like I say, I'm not a patient person. I wish I were. But I think it's really important for us to see that, nature does recover. Nature is resilient. It will recover from this, but we just got to wait for it. I think that is probably, for me, one of the most important lessons coming out of this. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard to deny with what we've been able to reforest on the Mount St. Helens footprint. It's hard to say that that's not a good thing. We were able to get forest cover back on the property sooner, and with that, undoubtedly, you see the whole ecosystem adapts differently because of that. I don't know that I necessarily want to say that it's a good thing versus a bad thing, but there's definitely things to learn. And like I say, I think that the biggest thing is recognizing that man, we're here, we're here, and we're part of this ecosystem. And how do we best fit into it? How do we best adapt? How do we best manage to kind of keep everything in accord? And that's, that's something that we at Weyerhaeuser, we recognize. We're a part of this ecosystem, and we have to be the best stewards that we possibly can. So looking at what happened at Mount St. Helens, yeah, I think it's a pretty good example of how you can take a pretty devastating situation and certainly try hard to try and turn it around a little bit more quickly. Yeah.